Let's grab a seat and get started. Glad everybody's here. Okay, last week we started on step 2. Has anybody got any questions on what we talked about? We went over the title of the chapter and the root origin of that, and I'm not sure what else we did last week. But so step 2 is the promise of hope. That's what step 2 is, okay? And I think we talked about last week, we talked about the difference between believing being hope rather than faith. You first have to come to believe before you have faith. You can't have faith in something you don't believe in. So it's a little bit of a process, okay? Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to focus on believing today, but first I want to talk about there's 2 qualifications in the big book for step 2. And we might have touched this at the very beginning. But on page 59, step 2 has the first qualification. And it says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So, the first qualification would be that it's a power greater than ourselves. Okay? And that's why we can eliminate doorknobs and trees and all that stuff. And then on page 93, on the top of the page before the first paragraph, it says, if a man be agnostic or atheist, make it emphatic that he does not have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him. So now that takes us back to the first condition. So, because you're going to run, if you stick around long enough and sponsor enough people, you're going to run into somebody that says that, the light bulb makes sense to them, that it's a power greater than ourselves. And, I always have a pat answer for that stuff. I tell people, if you believe that a light bulb or a doorknob or, something like that is a power greater than us, you're probably in the wrong place. You probably need one of those rooms that have padding on the wall and a special jacket to wear, because it's obviously not a power greater than us. So if that makes sense to you, we need to take a look at what's making sense to you, and we need to talk about that. Well, we don't define who and what God is for somebody, but according to our literature, it says it's got to be a power greater than us. A doorknob is just absolutely not a power greater than us. So we don't let people get away with that stuff, because their foundation, what we're building here is the foundation of the whole program of recovery, and the foundation is built on very weak grounds if we don't go into that. In our literature, it clearly says on page 45, towards the end of the second paragraph, it says, but his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God, for we have reopened. And then it talks about God again on that page a couple more times. God brought this and God brought that, and over again. But it also says in here that we're going to talk about God. Our book says that we're going to talk about God. If God runs somebody out of the room, and that's just what I choose to call my higher power, but if that runs you out of the room, that's your thing, not mine. I don't make excuses for that, and I don't, if that runs you out of the room and you're lucky enough to come back, you're going to have to get a power greater than yourself. And last week, I think we talked about this a little bit. We talked about the importance of it being your relationship with that God being enough where you're comfortable. Because if you're not comfortable with what you think and believe about God, there's no way you can do a third step. It's impossible for you to do a third step if you have such a weak foundation and you believe that God is going to judge you or, whatever, all of these things, punish you. If those are your beliefs, it'd be impossible to turn your will and your life over. And that's what we're looking to do in the third step. So I think it was about 10 years ago, where the hell was I? I was either in England or in Scotland, one of those two, and I was doing a workshop. And it was a weird setup. It was like an auditorium, so I was on a stage doing the workshop, and everybody was kind of sitting like that there. And we were talking about the second step, and a guy raised his hand, and he said, well, I'm an atheist, so where does that leave me? So I laughed, and I said, there's really no such thing as an atheist. And he said, well, how can you say that? I'm telling you that I'm an atheist. How could you tell me there's no such thing as that? I said, because you're really an agnostic. And it's just like, you don't like the solution to that. So you say, I said, but here's the example I gave him. If there were a 2,000-pound pink elephant right here, okay, and we all saw this pink elephant right here, and then we went and tried to tell other people what we saw, they wouldn't believe us, would they? So my point to that is that if there's no such thing as God, an atheist believes not only that there's no such thing as God, but that they can prove the non-existence of God. That's the definition of an atheist. They can prove the non-existence of God, which is a paradox in itself, isn't it? Why would somebody waste time proving the non-existence of something? Like, I know there's no 2,000-pound pink elephant here. So I don't have to try to convince you that there's no such thing as a 2,000-pound pink elephant here.
Anymore.
Right. So if I really believe that there's no such thing as God, then why is it so necessary for me to impose that upon you? The only answer to that is that you really do believe, but you don't want to. Right? So, and there was a guy that did, he gave the best definition of a thing for an atheist. And I'm gonna use this board for a minute. And what he did was, there was a whole bunch of people and they were discussing the existence and the non-existence of God. And he said, he was talking to an atheist, a guy who claimed to be an atheist. And he said, if this circle represents everything in the world, everything in the universe, all the knowledge that exists, the knowledge about everything, psychology, animals, planets, stars, minerals, everything, movies, and food, anything you can absolutely think of, everything in the entire universe. If this circle represented all of that knowledge, he asked the guy who said, how much, come up here and draw how much of this circle you would understand. And the guy came up, and this was a professor that was trying to prove there's no such thing as God. And he said, I would say that I know about this much of the entire knowledge of everything in the universe. And he was being kind to himself, I think. So, and I'm sorry, you guys are going to have to watch on YouTube to see the picture. But, and this was a professor, a very intelligent man, and he said that all the knowledge in the world, this is the amount that he knew. So the guy who was doing the workshop said, then how can you argue with the fact, and doesn't it make sense, that all of this that you don't know, maybe God exists in there? Right? That's pretty interesting when you look at it like that. If you're admitting that you only know that much, you don't know, can it be possible, isn't it possible that the God exists in all of that you don't know? So when we talk about that here, we're going to kind of concede the fact that atheism is bullshit. It's either, most of us are agnostic. Okay? A lot, and really what that means is that we know that there's a God, or we believe there's a God, but it's got nothing to do with us. God has nothing to do with me. And that's where most of us come from. When I was 10 years old, my dad died. And he was God to me. And so I didn't notice until I got sober and started looking at my life. But my entire life from that point on was I tried to replace my dad and be God in life. I don't know if that makes any sense to you. So I had no use for God growing up after that. And I tried to play God. Right? So that's what wound up with me. So we're even though if you ask me, nobody ever asked me, is there really a God? I'd say, yeah, there's a God. And you have a relationship with God? Absolutely not. God's got nothing to do with me. Because I was convinced before I got here that I was going to hell. And there was no way around that. You know. So, and I really, truly believed that. And when I got sober, because, you know, that's what Jesus used to preach, right? That you're going to go to hell. That's what I thought anyway. Then I read a Sermon on the Mount when I was sober by Emmett Fox, and he gave a great explanation of that. That what Jesus was talking about was that we're not really going to go to hell when we die. What we're doing is we create a hell of our own existence here on earth. And that's what, and I bought into that. See, so, and I share that with you because you can steal whatever you want, but it's up to you to come up with some type of concept of God. But don't get stuck on proving there is no God, because, you know, again, you know, the people that want to prove it, they believe in that Big Bang theory, right? And are you familiar with the Big Bang theory? The Big Bang is that there was nothing, and then a Big Bang, which they can't explain what caused the bang, and that Big Bang created everything. So what they say in essence is that nothing created everything. That's really laughable if you think about it, right? Nothing created everything. And that's the belief of some people that have no God in their life. So, all right. So let's talk about believing, because that is where we're at here in the second step. We want to come to believe. We have, let me say this to you. People like us have flaws, right? Our character is flawed. That's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with flawed character, aren't we? So part of the flawed character that is part of us, especially people like us, mostly everybody, but especially people like us, part of that is, let me see the best way to say it. We preconceive things to be certain ways. Okay? Just about everything in life, we preconceive to be certain ways. And then when reality differs from our preconception, it's easier for people like us to ignore reality than to change our preconception. Is that, you follow me there? So I preconceive something to be a certain way. When reality shows me it's different, it's easier for me to ignore reality than it is to change my preconception. And what recovery has done for me is taught me to be open-minded. And so the reason I shared that with you is because if we're talking about believing, we have to start somewhere. And the book tells us we can begin from wherever we're at. And that's fine. So what I did was I took my religious upbringing that wasn't so great, and the God that I had there, and I pressed, changed, and rearranged. Don't think that God will get upset if you do that. Only the religions will get upset. All right? You remember when we talked about this, remember when Ebby sat down with Bill and told Bill, choose your own concept of God, and I said there was two important things there in that saying, very important. One was, he's telling Bill to choose his own concept, so he's got nobody to argue with. This is his thought. But the other most important thing when Ebby told Bill that was that he's no longer carrying a religious message. He's now bringing a spiritual message. Because there's no religion on earth that tells you create your own God. Every religion says this is God and this is how you get there. So the dogma that they put forth is how you get to their God, right? And in AA, we're completely different than that. In AA, we just say, choose your own concept of God. So there's no religion that goes like that. So we're not talking about a religion. Okay. Well, first of all, let's talk about, you might want to write this down, 4 obstacles that block us from God. This is really powerful, these 4 things that block us from God. One, and in no particular order, but number one, someone I will not forgive. Someone I will not forgive. 2, a restitution I will not make.
Okay, no way.
Okay, these are 4 obstacles that block us from God. And number 1 is someone I will not forgive. Number 2 is a restitution I will not make. Number 3 is a secret I will not confess. And number 4, this one still haunts me. Number 4, a dubious pleasure I will not forego. A dubious pleasure I will not forego. So 4 things that block us, 4 obstacles that block us from God. Someone I will not forgive, a restitution I will not make, a secret I will not confess, a dubious pleasure I will not forego. A dubious pleasure I will not forego. So I have a question for you guys. How difficult is it for you to be open-minded and believe something that common sense says is not so? For instance, if I said to you that I'm going to take Justin and put Justin in this chair, and then I'm going to take Deb, Megan, Jason, and what's your name? Sarge? Is that what that thing says? The 4, you 3 ladies and that gentleman there, and you're going to come up here, and with 2 fingers, each of you using 2 fingers, you'll lift Justin and the chair completely off the ground. How many of you believe they can do that? Raise your hand. Okay? You guys really, you raise your hand, you really believe you can do that? Okay. You raise your hand, you really believe you can do that? They can do that? 2 fingers.
Leverage.
Leverage? Okay. So the rest of you, if you don't believe they can do that, raise your hand. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do, I know it's going to be inconvenient for a minute, but Justin, if you would come sit up here. And everybody, and thanks for letting me volunteer you. Everybody on this side of the room, I want you to go all the way back down there and that. Just get out of the way for a minute. And everybody over here, except for Deb and Megan. And Sarge. And Jason.
It's a savage.
So the rest of you guys just go back down there, and we'll call you when we're ready. And don't look. No looking. Now you guys stay. This side of the room, hey, just you stay.
Okay.
And your buddy there, you stay. This side of the room stays.
So what do you want me to do? Is keep recording?
Yeah, just keep going here.
And I know they come.
Did you say knock it out of the chair?
No. Go back, guys, and no looking over here.
No cheating, no fair.
No. Here's what I want you to do.
It's not, you can't look.
Interlock your fingers. Okay? And yeah, just like this. Okay. Now, come on this side. So, all 4 of you, come in here. Okay? Close your legs a little. And get your rest of the chair.
Don't
on these 2 fingers. Okay, like that. And when I count to 3, you're going to have to stand up a little because you're going to have to lift. When I count to 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Did it come off the camera?
Yep.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Okay, guys, come back. Come back and take your seats. Quiet. Now here's the fun part, the interesting part. So I'm going to say to all of you people that weren't here, is that these 4 people, 3 ladies and 1 gentleman, using 2 fingers each, lifted Justin and the chair completely off the ground. That's going to say what happened when you weren't here. How many of you believe me? Okay. The rest of you non-believers?
I'm still up.
And the reason, and you saw it and you're still
I know, I
skeptical.
saw it, I'm still
okay. So now, the 4 of you guys the 4 of you and Justin, did it happen? Did you do it?
Yes.
Did you use 2 fingers?
Yes.
Did you lift him and the chair off the ground? So now I'm going to ask you guys again. The 4 of them just said that they did it. How many of you believe me now?
Sure, I believe you.
Okay.
I believe you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it gets a little better. Just in a matter of 1 minute, it's gotten a little better. That some of you that didn't believe a minute ago now heard others say that it was true, and now they believe because they believe in them. Or they believe that. See, so let's be logical for a minute here. And let's talk about logic. It would have to be a conspiracy. None of you knew I was going to call on you. It would have to be a conspiracy that we're all, and all, you guys saw it. Do you believe it can happen? Raise your hand. You believe it can happen? Okay. So we'd all have to make a plan that it didn't happen, but we're lying to you, and we're all going to stick to that lie. That's one version of what could be. And the other version of what could be is maybe it really did happen. But it's not logical. It doesn't make sense that 4 people could use 2 fingers and lift somebody off the ground in the chair and all. They didn't go high with it. They just cleared the ground. John is still shaking his head. You see, because we've been conditioned to believe what we see. If I can't see it, touch it, feel it, if it's not tangible, it's not real. And God is not tangible. We've been conditioned to believe that the substance of life is what I have. I have a home, 4 walls, a ceiling and a floor, and everything in this 4 walls and ceiling and floor, I've got couches and TVs and beds and this and that and a pool table, and I got all of this stuff. And we've been conditioned to believe that the substance of life is these things, when in all actuality, the substance of life takes place in the empty space between the walls and the ceiling and the floor. And the intangible, what I can't see and I can't touch, that's where life takes place. But we've been conditioned to believe the tangible. So, John, let me ask you. You've been sober for a long time. Why do you think it didn't happen?
Reality. It just,
Your reality.
my reality.
Yeah.
My reality. It just doesn't seem possible. I would have to see it for me to believe it.
Okay? But everybody on this side of the room, and these two here, saw it. She's still a little skeptical, even though she saw it.
I did, and I'm not, when you said raise it off the ground, but it would get, they had
It
a
was
little
shaky.
practice if they were.
It was shaky, but all 4 legs left the ground.
So she had a preconceived notion how it was going to be raised
Yes.
off the ground, and it didn't meet that expectation.
Very good.
I didn't have to
Therefore,
look, yeah.
Very good.
yeah.
That's what we're talking
Yes,
about.
I still have that. I saw it, but I still don't want to.
So,
Empirical evidence.
yeah, hey, he's got the evidence. When you go on YouTube tomorrow, and you look on YouTube, you'll see it raised off the ground, John. It's on YouTube. The proof is there. But isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting? And now here I come. I've been running and gunning my whole life. Grew up in the ghetto in New York. Had a horrific life. Not a family life. I had a good family life, but a horrific life. Alcohol and drugs and reform schools and prisons and all of that stuff. And I got sober and you told me that trust and rely upon God. Huh. What? God hasn't been present in my life, my entire life. How am I going to trust and rely upon something that was not there for me? Ever. Without realizing that my petty deeds and my shitty actions put me exactly where I'm at. God didn't do it to me. I did it to me. In fact, if anybody ever would have treated me as bad as I treated myself, I would have killed them in a minute. So, how do we deal with people like me and people like you that just have to see it to believe it? Everything's not going to be on YouTube for you to look up tomorrow. The presence of God is not going to be on YouTube. What's going to be on YouTube are thousands, I assume, thousands of little videos of people talking about the presence of God. But they're actually no different than those people raising their hand and say, yeah, it happened. Yeah, we did it. I saw it.
Said about Bigfoot too.
Huh?
He said about Bigfoot and stuff too. Well, I mean, for real.
Yeah? Yeah.
That's for real.
So how do we deal with people like us? Well, first we study our literature. We study we agnostics. Don't forget the title, the root origin of the word agnostic comes from 2 Greek words meaning lack knowledge. We went over that last week. lack knowledge. Agnostic means lack knowledge. If I had the knowledge, if I knew about God, I wouldn't doubt God. If I saw that chair go off the ground, I wouldn't doubt it. But without that knowledge, it doesn't meet my paradigm. It doesn't fit into my paradigm. See, this is how we're born. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this. This is how we're born. E over I. Emotion over intellect. 100%. As we grow up, as little children, as your kids are back there, they start experiencing life. As we grow up, we start learning things. We start gathering some knowledge. We start getting some knowledge in our life. And what happens for us by the time we're teenagers, we should be something like that. Where emotion and intellect are almost on a, it's still young, so we're still a little more emotional than we are intellectual. But when we become adults, we should have an equal balance of emotion and intellect. Now, I was 32 when I got sober. I started drinking and using drugs when I was 12. So I was a big 32-year-old baby. And when I got sober at 32 years old, my emotional and intellectual balance was not there. I grew up in Alcoholics Anonymous. And when you talked about God, it was a total emotional reaction. No such thing. God ain't got nothing to do with me. Yeah, there's a God. Ain't got a damn thing to do with me. Because God never worked in my life. He never showed up in my life. I didn't get sober to get a relationship with God. I got sober to get that 2,000-pound gorilla off my back. Because you know what a 2,000-pound gorilla does? Any damn thing he wants to. And you're the vessel that he uses to do it. And that's all I wanted was to get rid of the gorilla. I didn't come here to find God. But as I started growing up in Alcoholics Anonymous and started getting these spiritual principles in my life, my intellect started working. And to me, intellectually, it makes absolutely no sense that nothing created everything. So therefore, and I always really believed that there was a God, just didn't have nothing to do with me. So therefore, I now have a choice. If there really is a God, I can live in this world with a relationship with God or without a relationship with God. And I had just spent my first 32 years in a relationship without God. And I came in here for something different. And so I decided that I was going to start believing in something. I have an older brother that's sober 40 years or so, born-again Christian. Never been to a meeting in his life. Straight up dope fiend in the 1970s would have ripped your heart out for some more dope. Found God, born-again Christian. His life is completely different. Works for him. We don't have a lock on recovery. We don't have a lock on a relationship with God, AA. We don't have that. There's other ways to do it. I have none of our business to talk about it in AA. In AA, we have one solution. So, if there is a God, and my life for the first 32 years was horrible, was horrific, and I'm trying to get something different, let me start believing in something. Let me see if that does anything for me. And then I read all of the stories in the back of the book after page 164. Because people always say the first 164 pages. No, the book tells us to read it through. And when I started reading all the stories, it was interesting how people came to find a God and build a relationship with God. And I saw people come in the rooms, and I saw them, listened to their testimony when they got up to the podium. And when you come up to the podium, I believe whatever you say. If you choose to lie up here, that's your business. I'm going to believe it. And you come up here, one after the other, they all talked about getting a relationship with God. Coming to believe in something other than themselves. Coming to believe in something that could help us. Because I can't do it by myself. If I could do it by myself, I never would have got here. Never would have came. Why? So step 2 asks us to believe that we have a chance at staying sober, provided we're willing to enlist the help of a power greater than ourselves. And for me, you know, when I got sober, I used the group for a while as my higher power. The book says you can do that. You know why I did that? Because the guy, I told the guy just what I told you a few minutes ago. I told the guy one day, I said, I don't want to hear this shit about God. I didn't come here to find God. And he says, well, then use the group as a higher power. And I went, you guys? And he said, Danny, now I got sober in New York, there's a lot of people meeting. He said, Danny, look around this room. Must have been 100 people in the room. He said, collectively, can everybody kick your ass? I said, yeah, collectively, sure they can kick my ass. He said, well, then collectively, everybody can help you, can't they? And I said, yeah. And so I used the group for a higher power for a while. And that works, and that's fine, and the book says you can do that. You can't stay sober for long periods of time on that, though. But just to get through the rough bumps at the beginning is fine. Anybody got any questions on what we talked about so far? All right, well, let's look at some of the things the book has to say about all this. So page 44. So this first paragraph on page 44 is Alcoholics Anonymous' distinction. They separate the alcoholic from the non-alcoholic. Look what it says. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. So, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, that would be the mental. Or, if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, that would be the physical. You are probably alcoholic. Now sometimes the book kind of contradicts itself. It says we don't declare anybody alcoholic. And they're not really declaring you alcoholic here. They're asking you to declare yourself alcoholic. If one of these two things, or both of them, are true for you, you're probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. To one who feels that he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he's an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. Why is that? That doesn't make sense, does it? I had to read that a bunch of times when I first read that. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. Well, that doesn't make sense. I stand in front of you today just baffled by that statement. But when I first got here, it made no sense to me at all. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis? That doesn't seem like much of a choice. I'll take the spiritual basis. I'll take door number one, Monty. You know. So, it doesn't make sense. Why would somebody even consider that option? But they're both not easy to face. Why? Because we preconceive things to be a certain way. And we're dealing with that preconception. But it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Now, it's a very powerful statement. He's not suggesting it'd be a good idea. He's making a bold statement. We must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Well, people like us don't like that or else shit. Don't give me an alternative. Perhaps it's going to be that way with you. But cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. So believing is a spiritual principle. It's a spiritual tool, and everybody has the power to use it. Everyone. Believing is a spiritual tool that every one of us have the power to use. And believing is the state of mind that precedes action, whether it's good or bad. I've already come to the conclusion in the first step that without God, I'm powerless. So he says, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life was sufficient to overcome alcoholism, he's talking about the disease. You notice that, right? If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, not alcohol, alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. So again, it's talking about the disease, not the drinking. You get that? Does that make sense? If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life was sufficient to overcome the disease, not the drinking. Alcoholism, not alcohol. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. You've heard probably many times in life that knowledge is power, right? Anybody not heard that before? Knowledge is power. What does the chapter of this, the title of this chapter tell us?
We don't have knowledge.
That we lack knowledge, doesn't it? So if I lack knowledge, then obviously I lack power. The problem is we don't really believe that we lack knowledge. So therefore, we believe we have knowledge, therefore we believe we have power. That's the trickiness of being human. So look what it says here. Lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Then Bill uses one word for a whole sentence. Obviously. Like you idiot. Obviously. But where and how will we define this power? Mark that in your book, people. That is in step 2, where the search begins for a higher power. Right there. But where and how will we define this power? The search for a God begins right here in our book. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. So here's another paradox, another tricky thing with us humans. I'm not really sure what my problem was when I got here. I know I drank too much. I know I did too much dope. But I thought that was the problem. I drank too much and I did too much dope. I didn't think that all this other stuff was my problem. So when I got sober and I didn't drink and I didn't do dope, I shouldn't have these problems. If my thinking were correct, if you follow my thinking that way, if drinking and drugs was my problem and I don't drink and drug, then I shouldn't have a problem. Bill says that means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, that we're going to talk about God. Right there. We're going to talk about God. Again, that offends you. Oh well. But we're going to talk about God. You see, we spent some time discussing this way at the beginning of this thing 8 weeks or so ago. But if I got somebody to ask me to sponsor them, and they come to me, and I don't talk to them about God, who their God is, or what their God is, as far as I know then, they may have a light bulb as a higher power. And it's my fault that this person is going to fail later. People say, oh, it's not your fault, you don't get people sober, and you know, well, no, but you contribute to their sickness. If I don't talk to you about this higher power thing, then how do I know what you think and believe about God? I'm not going to tell you what you have to think and believe about God, but I am going to tell you what you cannot think and believe about God. You cannot think that a light bulb, or a doorknob, or whatever that is, the leaves on the tree, or whatever is a higher power. That's not. It is not. Now, you go to enough meetings, you'll hear somebody share that this week coming up. Don't matter. Use the doorknob. Now, if somebody's a real alcoholic and they ask that person to sponsor them, and that person is sharing shit like, use the light bulb as your higher power. Or here's another good one. You believe that I believe? I don't give a shit what you believe. It ain't going to help me. I need to believe something myself that's going to help me. I can believe that collectively you guys know of a power, because what happens when you came back in this room, collectively everybody said they lift them off the chair, off the ground. And a couple of people changed their opinion because collectively they said they did it. So that's a different thing. So it means we're going to talk about God. Here, difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss the alcoholic problem and explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. For we have reopened the subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. And he talks about to others the word God brought on a particular idea of him and all that stuff. Page 46, top of the page, right before the first paragraph, it says, like in the middle of the top of the page there, it says, how could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet, in other moments, we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? Good question. Oh, wait a minute. Nothing created all that, did it? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we are able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we have commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power which is God. Now, talk about a few things in that little paragraph there. I've argued with people over the years that try to tell me that this paragraph that I just read, the first paragraph on page 46, is what the second step is. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and even express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results. If that were the second step, I believe there's like 36 more paragraphs in this chapter that are not necessary. What is the prejudice? When I say prejudice, what are we talking about? We're talking about our old ideas. We're not talking about, I don't like black people, or I don't like Chinese people, or I don't like Jewish people. We're not talking about that kind of prejudice. We're talking about our old ideas. That's the prejudice that we're talking about. Because our old ideas is what? That's our paradigm. That's how we preconceived everything in life so far. Does that make sense to you? And because I preconceived everything to be a certain way like that in life, I can't get past the hump. I can't imagine that 4 people can use 2 fingers and lift somebody off the floor in a chair. Doesn't make any sense. Got to see it to believe it. Tangible proof. Tangible proof will be on YouTube tomorrow. Okay. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect the contact with Him. So, wherever you are at is a good place for you to start your search for a higher power. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We kept doing this deal. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek Him. To us, the realm of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men. So the truth is going to set you free. You've heard that before. The truth sets us free from what? The truth sets us free from the lie. which is insanity.
The old
Sen-
ideas?
huh?
The old ideas?
Yes. The old ideas is what keep you in the insanity. And the truth will set you free from that. Because, what does the step say?
Restores the sense.
Restores to sanity. Good definition, you might want to write this down. Good definition of the word sanity for us. Sanity is the ability to see the truth about myself. Sanity is the ability to see the truth about myself. And obviously, insanity is the inability to see the truth about myself. Those old ideas. You see, because our truth is not the whole truth. Only God can see the whole truth. Our perception of the truth leads us right back to the lie, the insanity. The truth has to come from somewhere beyond us. Does that make sense to you? It's that paradigm that we were talking about. Does everybody know what the word paradigm? Anybody not know what that word means? Paradigm?
I don't know what it means.
Paradigm is the way I see the world. Okay? In other words, my reality. My reality is not reality. It's just my reality.
Did you say our perception of the truth?
Sometimes they're one and the same. I said sometimes they're one and the same. The more spiritual I am, the more sober the longer I stay sober, and the more of a relationship I have with God, that sometimes happens more often. But even sober, as long as I've been sober, my reality is not always reality. My paradigm is skewed. It's a little warped. In fact, if you knew what went through my head, you probably would never sit next to me. Some sick shit goes through my head. But recovery is about what we do in spite of how we think. Don't forget that. Recovery is about what we do in spite of how we think. It's not about what we think. It's what we do in spite of how we think. Who's got any questions? We're going to leave it there and pick it up next week. Same time, same channel. Anybody got any questions real quick before we go? Okay. I know, the hour's
I
up.
know, so fast.
Thank you guys, appreciate it. Hey, there's a bucket over here if you want to throw something in so we can pay for the room.